Okay, now let's start with the interview preparation part 1. The first question, can you tell something about Docker container? Now, I recommend you to pause the video, then try answer it yourself, then see the full answer. Now, in simplest term, Docker container consists of applications and all their dependencies. They share the kernel and system resources with other containers and run as isolated systems in the host operating system. The main aim of Docker containers is to get rid of the infrastructure dependency while deploying and running applications. This means that any containerized application can run on any platform irrespective of the infrastructure being used beneath. So technically, they are just the runtime instances of Docker images. What are Docker images? They are executable packages bundled with application code dependencies and software packages, etc., etc., for the purpose of creating containers. So Docker images can be deployed to any Docker environment, and the containers can be spun up there to run the application. What is a DockerFile? So it is a text file actually that has all commands which need to be run for building a given image. So let's see this image. This is how Docker containers are created. So we have a DockerFile, and then we build it. Then we have a Docker image, and after that we run a container from this image. So as you can see, we get a Docker container. Can you tell what is the functionality of hypervisor? Hypervisor is a software that makes virtualization happen, because of which is sometimes referred to as the virtual machine monitor. This divides the resources of the host system and allocates them to each guest environment installed. So you can see that here, this is the hardware. We have the hypervisor, and we have operating OS 1, OS 2, OS 3. So let's continue. This means that multiple OS can be installed on a single host system. The hypervisors are two types. First, the native hypervisor. This type is also called a bare metal hypervisor and runs directly on the underlying host system. Which also ensures direct access to the host hardware, which is why it doesn't require base OS. The second type, which is hosted hypervisor. This type makes use of underlying host operating system, which has the existing OS installed. What can you tell about Docker Compose? It is a YAML file consisting of all the details regarding various services, networks, and volumes that are needed for setting up Docker-based application. So Docker Compose is used for creating multiple containers, host them, and establish communication between them. For the purpose of communicating amongst the containers, bots are exposed by each and every container. Can you tell something about Docker namespace? A namespace is basically a Linux feature that ensures OS resources partition in a mutual exclusive manner. This forms the core concept behind containerization, as namespaces introduce a layer of isolation amongst the containers. In a Docker, the namespaces ensure that the containers are portable and they do not affect the underlying host. So for example, for namespace types that are currently being supported by Docker, PID, mount, user, network, IPC, and so on. What is the Docker command that lists the status of all Docker containers? To get the status of all the containers, we run the below command, docker ps-a. On what circumstances will you lose data stored into a container? The data of a container remains in it until and unless you delete the container. What is Docker image registry? A Docker image registry, in simple terms, is an area where the Docker images are stored. Instead of converting the application into some containers each and every time, a developer can directly use the images stored in the registry. So this image registry can either be public or private, and Docker Hub is the most popular and famous public registry available. How many Docker components are there? There are 3 Docker components actually, the Docker client, Docker host, and Docker registry. Docker client, this component performs build and run operation for the purpose of opening communication with Docker host. Docker host, this component has the main Docker daemon and host containers and their associated images. The daemon establishes a connection with the Docker registry. And Docker registry, this component stores the Docker images. There can be a public registry or private one. The most famous public registry are Docker Hub and Docker Cloud. To continue, here is an image that describes everything. So this is the client, and we have the command Docker build, Docker pull, Docker run, etc. We have the Docker host here. You can see inside it we have the Docker daemon, the images, for example, Redis, Alpine, etc., etc. And we have the containers, 1, container 2, container 3. Finally, we have the registry. The registry here, you can see that this is the Python, and we have Redis image, we have Alpine image, etc., etc. And here you can see that with dot here, this is build, the line with dot here, and the line with the dashes here. This is the pull. You can see that we are the Docker image, sorry, the Docker daemon here is pulling the image Alpine from the Docker registry. And run here, you can see that Docker run will run a command so the client will send the command Docker run to the Docker host, which is the Docker daemon. What is a Docker Hub? It is a public cloud-based registry provided by Docker for storing public images of the containers, along with the provision of finding and sharing them. The images can be pushed to the Docker Hub through the Docker push command. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next lecture, where we will handle part 2.